I can't the island last
Ay, 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 ra, ra. Ba, ra, 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 ra. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Got a light bulb out. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Lucy in Minnesota, Bill in mid-Missouri, Joe in the Inland Empire, Paul in the Great Northwest, Gail in Kansas City, Yehuda in South Carolina, Bella in Florida, Melissa in Great Neck, Sharon in New Jersey, Lorraine in Texas. I just got back from Texas, as you know. We had a great time in Houston speaking at Yom Limud. The people were so sweet, so welcoming. Told a new joke outside of a great kosher steakhouse. If you're ever in Houston, Prime Grill and Bar, I think it's called. It's just a really good burger. Sharon in New Jersey on the YouTube side, and Lynn in Canada, and Moshe in Brooklyn, and Chaim in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Relatively short daf tonight, continuing our journey through tractate Menachot, the 30th volume of the Talmud. We are tonight, with God's help, going to complete chapter 3. We're continuing our discussion of Mishna number 10. General idea was elements of mitzvahs which are all required, and if they're not all there, you haven't done anything, right? So the menorah in the Mishkan or in the Beis Hamikdash, in the tabernacle, in the wilderness, or in Shiloh, or later when the Holy Temple was built in Jerusalem, the menorah was a 7-branched menorah. If any of those branches were missing, the fact that you lit the other ones did mean that you fulfilled some kind of a mitzvah. You completed no mitzvah. These are mitzvahs that require all elements, all or nothing. Likewise, all of the words and all of the letters in the mezuzah scroll or in the scrolls inside tefillin or in a Sefer Torah, if they're not all there, that would invalidate it. And so once we got into these kinds of legal rulings, we've also been doing a lot of other elements and particulars of mezuzah, and today we're continuing our discussion of tefillin. Okay, we're picking this up on page 36b, about, maybe halfway, a little less than halfway down 36b, but this was a short, really short page. Okay, so Rabbi Elazar says, anyone who wraps tefillin after sunset, what's going to be the problem, right? We learned that daytime is the proper time for wearing tefillin. Nowadays, we only put on tefillin during morning prayers. In Talmudic times, they would wear their tefillin all day long, but not at night. Why not at night? What was the issue with nighttime? That's what we're really talking about now. A second. Okay. So, says Rabbi Elazar, anyone who wraps tefillin, meaning puts on his tefillin after sunset, violates a positive mitzvah. And Rabbi Yochanan says he violates a prohibition, right? So a positive mitzvah, thou shalt do such and such. A prohibition, thou shalt not do such and such. Let's see what they mean. The Gemara suggests, let us say that these sages disagree with regard to the principle that Rabbi Avin says, that Rabbi Ilya says. As Rabbi Avin says, that Rabbi Ilya says, any place where it is stated in the Torah, any of the terms, observe, right? Observe is how we're translating shomer or shomer. So shomer is a guard, right? The shomrim are the guards of a community. So when it says shomer, right, that you shall guard these precepts, right? And it's often translated as you shall observe these precepts. And so when we're talking about Shabbos, for example, right, there's the Shabbos, the command to keep Shabbos is stated in a bunch of places, but it appears, of course, in the two statements of the Ten Commandments, right, because keeping Shabbos is the fourth commandment, and the Ten Commandments are stated twice, in the book of Exodus and in the book of Devarim. There are slight differences. In one of them, it says about Shabbos, right, that you will shomer Shabbos, right? People say, I'm shomer Shabbos, right? I guard Shabbos. And it says that you will zachor Shabbos. You will remember Shabbos, right? So being shomer Shabbos, a shomer of Shabbos, means you're guarding Shabbos, and that means that you're guarding yourself from coming to violate the prohibitions, the negative commandments, i.e., thou shalt not work, right? Thou shalt not do work on Shabbos. And as we've learned many times, what are the kinds of work that you don't do on Shabbos? Well, there's 39 categories of work, and they're all related to the work that was necessary to build the Mishkan, which is what we're learning about in these parshas, the Torah portions that we're reading in these weeks that we're in now. Right, so you don't do work on Shabbos. That's a prohibition. So shomer is guarding yourself from coming to violate negative prohibitions. Zachor Shabbos, remember Shabbos. That's a positive, right? That's when we bless Shabbos by making kiddush, right? We make kiddush over the wine. We sanctify Shabbos. That's a positive action. So it's very interesting. I'm going to be talking more about this when I'm in Israel, actually. But this idea that as soon as we're told to remember something in Judaism, in Jewish practice, it automatically implies do something, right? It's always a tradition and a faith based in commandments that are always simultaneously backward-looking and forward-looking and in the present, right? So when we're told to remember, that means we have to do, right? But when we're guarding, then we're guarding ourselves from doing something that we're not supposed to do, okay? So what they're saying here is observe or shomer, but also other terms like lest, lest you come to do such and such, or simply do not, right? Loisa said do not, or al. These mean nothing other than a prohibition. These are negative terms. So the Gemara explains what it's talking about. As this sage, Rabbi Yochanan, is of the opinion that the ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Avin, and therefore the verse, and you shall observe this ordinance in its season from year to year, from which the exclusion of nights is derived, that this is a prohibition, as it employs the term shomer, right? That you shall observe. What is that you're refraining from doing? Wearing tefillin at night. And the other sage, Rabbi Lazar, is of the opinion that the ruling is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Avin, and therefore the term, and you shall observe, is not always a negative prohibition. It can actually be a positive commandment. They both agree that you don't wear tefillin at night. The question is, if you do it, did you violate a prohibition or a positive commandment? Now, the Gemara counters, no. Everyone is of the opinion that the ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Avin, which would imply that it's a prohibition, with the opinion that Rabbi Avin says that Rabbi Ilya says. And here, what they disagree about is with regard to this. One sage, Rabbi Lazar, holds that the term observe, written with regard to a prohibition, has the status of a prohibition, whereas the same term observe, written with regard to a positive mitzvah, has the status of a positive mitzvah, as the Torah is issuing a warning to take special care in observance of a positive mitzvah. So accordingly, the command with regard to the positive mitzvah of tefillin is a positive mitzvah. And the other sage, Rabbi Yochanan, holds that the term observe, written with regard to a positive mitzvah, is also a prohibition. And Rabbi Lazar says, and although it is prohibited to wrap tefillin at night, if one does so in order to safeguard them from theft and the like, it is permitted. So it's not this absolute prohibition that you can't wear them at night, or in this case, you can't even put them on at night. There's an exception. An exception would be for the sake of the tefillin. If you're afraid because you're on the road and you're sleeping in a sketchy inn, right, and there are bandits about and you think that they might steal your tefillin if it's not on you, so you can put them on even at night for the sake of the tefillin. And Ravina said, I was sitting before Rav Ashi and it grew dark. And he wrapped tefillin, right? He put on his tefillin after it was dark. And I said to him, does the master need to safeguard them? Are you afraid that they will be stolen? And he said to me, yes. But I saw that his intention in wrapping them was not that he needed to safeguard them. Rather, Rav Ashi holds, this is the law, that night is an appropriate time for tefillin, but a public ruling is not issued to that effect. So interesting, right? It's not that you can't wear them at night. It's that there's some other problem with the nighttime that makes tefillin inappropriate for the public. And therefore, even though it is an appropriate time to wear tefillin, even at night, we're not going to state that publicly because it will lead the public to commit errors. And what is that? The issue is sleeping. What you can't do is wear tefillin when you're sleeping. Why? Because your hands wander when you're asleep and you might come to do something inappropriate while you're sleeping and wearing tefillin. Therefore, you should take them off lest you fall asleep with your tefillin on. But seems like if you're a sage of great stature and you know you're not going to fall asleep with your tefillin on and you prefer to wear your tefillin at night, then that's okay. But the sage is not going to promote that view publicly because people of lesser stature could come to err. Now, Rabba Bar Rab Huna says a person is obligated to touch his tefillin regularly for the entire time that he is wearing them. And this is derived from a kal v'chomer inference from the tzitz, the front plate of the high priest, as follows. And if with regard to the front plate, right, which was made of gold and worn by the high priest when the temple was standing in Jerusalem, and it said on it, holy to Hashem, holy to God, which has only one mention of God's name, and the Torah states, and it should always be upon his forehead, which means that the high priest must always be aware that the tzitz is placed on his head, and that he should not be distracted from knowing that it's on his head. Then, with regard to tefillin, which have many more mentions of the name of God, not just holy to God, but remember the scrolls inside the tefillin are passages from the Shema, which mention God's name many times. All the more so must a person be aware that he is literally wearing God's name on his body. That's why he has to be aware that he is in exalted, sanctified state. He should keep touching the tefillin to remind himself, and therefore to remind himself, not to touch his privates, not to go to the bathroom wearing the tefillin, not to speak inappropriate words. He's in an exalted state. Even more we're always in the presence of God, but now that you're wearing God's name on your body, you've got to behave like somebody who's wearing God's name on his body. The sages taught with regard to the verse, and it shall be for a sign for you on your arm. Yadcha. Now we're going to get into the fact that when we're commanded to put, now remember, tefillin itself the word is never mentioned in the Torah. When God tells us, right, that these words, that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, etc., these words shall be for a sign upon your arm and a symbol in front of your eyes, or frontlets in front of your eyes, totafot in front of your eyes, but for a sign upon your arm, yadcha. So what are they saying here? The sages taught with regard to the verse, and it shall be for a sign for you on your arm, in Exodus 13:9, that this is referring to the left arm. How do we know it's the left arm? Let's keep reading. Do you say it means the left arm, or is it only the right arm? And the verse states, even my hand, now God is talking, right? Even my hand, yadi, has laid the foundation of the earth, and my right hand, v'imini, has spread out the heavens, in Isaiah 48:13. So this seems to imply that when God is talking about his left hand or left arm, he just calls it the yad, and when he's talking about his right, he calls it the right, right? And that's going to be repeated a few times. And another verse states, her hand, yada, she put to the tent pin, and her right hand, ve'imina, to the workman's hammer, right? This is Yael killing Sisera in Judges 5:26. And another verse states, why do you withdraw your hand, yadcha, even your right hand, ve'iminecha? Draw it out of your bosom and consume them, from Psalm 74. All these verses employ the term yad with regard to the left hand and use the term yamin, literally right, as right versus left, right, without the term yad to indicate the right hand. So this would suggest that when God says yad without a modifier, he means the left. And when he wants to tell you to use your right, he'll say right. Now we're on 37a. Rabbi Yosei HaChorem says, this is no proof, as we have found that the right hand is also called yad, as it is stated, and when Joseph saw that his father was laying his right hand, yad yamino, in Genesis 48:17, right? Joseph saw that Jacob was going to bless Menashe before Ephraim, and he wanted Ephraim before Menashe, and he wanted him to bless Menashe, who was older. So the Gemara asks, and the other Tana who maintains that the right hand is not called yad, how does he respond to this proof? Well, this would be the exception that proves the rule. He maintains that the right hand is called his right hand, yad yamino, but it is not called a yad without further specification. If when God means right hand, he says right hand, and he includes the modifier, that seems to prove, in fact, that when he says yad without any modifier, that he means the left. So Rabbi Nassim says, you're barking up the wrong tree. All of this kind of proof about yad and yad yamino and yamina and yamino, it's not necessary. We have a much simpler way to prove that when you put on tefillin, it has to go on the left arm. As it says, and you shall bind them for a sign upon your arm. Deuteronomy 6:8. And then it states, and you shall write them upon the doorposts of your house, in Deuteronomy 6:9. Now, what do we learn about mezuzah? Right? That when we enter a house, it's on our right, and we touch the mezuzah, right, and kiss our fingers as we walk in the house, right, so that we can fulfill so that we can honor that mitzvah as we walk by it, so we can be reminded that we're walking into a house, that God's name is written on that house. Literally, that's why we put that mezuzah on the doorpost of the house and every room where people reside, right, and it's on your right as you walk in. So now you know that this mitzvah is done with the right hand. Why do you wrap tefillin on your left arm? So that you can wrap it with your right hand. The mitzvah of wrapping tefillin, of placing it on your arm, that's done with the sort of dominant hand in Judaism, right? Right precedes left in most things. And so when you're doing the mitzvah of wrapping these words, right, on your arm, you're doing it with your right hand, and that's why it needs to be on your left arm. and you shall write them upon the doorposts of your house. And this teaches that just as writing is with the right hand, when we write on the doorposts of the house, as most people write with their right hand, so too, binding the tefillin must be performed with the right hand. And since binding is with the right hand, this means that donning, that wrapping, is on the left arm, as one cannot wrap the tefillin with the same hand upon which he is, as one cannot bind the tefillin with the same hand upon which he is donning them, right? Upon which he is wrapping them. You can't use your right hand to put the tefillin on your right arm. So if you're going to use your right hand, it has to be on your left arm. And the Gemara asks, and from where does Rabbi Yosef HaChorim, who holds that the right hand is also called Yad in the Torah, derive that donning tefillin is on the left arm? And the Gemara answers, well, he derives it from where Rabbi Nassan derives it. He uses the same concept. And Rav Ashi said, the requirement that the tefillin be wrapped on the left arm is derived from the verse, it shall be for a sign upon your arm, yadcha, in Exodus 13:16, not in Deuteronomy, but in Exodus, which is written with a letter Hey at the end. And this is expounded as though it stated your weak arm. And Rabbi Abba said to Rav Ashi, but one can say that Yadcha with a Hey at the end should be interpreted as Yadkoya with a letter Ches at the end instead of a Hey, Yadkoyach instead of a Hey. If so, this would mean your arm that is of strength, Shekoyach, right? Like we say Yasher Koyach, right? That implies strength, which is the right arm. And Rav Ashi said to Rabbi Abba, is this word written with a ches? It's not written with a ches. So the Gemara notes that Rav Ashi's opinion that the law that the tefillin are wrapped on the left arm is derived from the term yadcha is subject to a dispute between the Tanaim. As it is taught in a baraisa, yadcha is written with a hey, indicating weakness, and this is referring to the left arm, right? So they're built into the word your arm, because it's spelled with this hey at the end, it suggests the weak arm, okay, because of kecha, weak. And so that's how you know that it goes on the weak arm, because most people are right-handed. I really like Rabbi Nassan's proof the best, it seems to me, right? If you're going to write and bind, and these are compared to each other, you're going to do that with the right hand, and so it ends up on the left arm. But if you're going to do it as a matter of the spelling with the hey at the end, that it's the weak arm, that you're going to wrap on the weak arm, well, this leads to a dispute between Tanaim. Right? Yadcha is written with a hey, indicating weakness, and this is referring to the left arm. But others say your arm, i.e. Yadcha, serves to include one without a complete arm, i.e. one whose arm ends at the elbow, in the obligation to wrap tefillin. God forbid a person loses his arm from the elbow down, he still has the bicep. And so the bicep is where the box of the arm tefillin actually rests, right here on the inner bicep, pointed towards your body, towards your heart. Now, he would not have the place to make the 7 loops, right, and then finish it up with a knot on the hand, but he can still place the box here, and then he would do the best he can with the strap below the bicep. So what they're saying is, we learned from Yadcha that a person who lacks a forearm but has a bicep would still place it on the left arm. Where am I? Others say your arm, Yadcha, serves to include one without a complete arm, i.e. one whose arm ends at the elbow, in the obligation to wrap tefillin, as the remaining part is also categorized as a weak arm. It is taught in another baraisa, if one does not have a left arm, meaning he doesn't even have a bicep, he was amputated or somehow he lost his arm all the way up, God forbid, at the shoulder, then he is exempt from the mitzvah of tefillin. Now that's interesting, right? Because he has a right arm. So you might think, well, he doesn't have a left arm, so he should put tefillin on his right arm. He can't do it himself, but somebody could help him. Answer, no. Since the mitzvah is to put it on the left arm for a right-handed person, if he's a right-handed person and he's lost his left arm entirely, he's exempt from tefillin. Others say Yadcha serves to include one without a left arm, even above the elbow, teaching that he must wrap tefillin on his right arm, right? So there's another dispute there. Now, the sages taught in a baraisa, a left-handed person wraps tefillin on his right arm. Right? We see that all the time, right? There's always left-handed people around, and they do put the tefillin on their right arm. That includes my rabbi. He does it on his right arm because he's left-handed. A left-handed person wraps tefillin on his right arm because for him, that is the equivalent of his left arm, i.e. the weaker arm. And the Gemara raises a difficulty, but isn't it taught in a baraisa that a left-handed person wraps tefillin on his left arm, which is the left arm of every other person? And Abaye said, when the baraisa is taught, it is referring to one who has equal control with both his hands, i.e. an ambidextrous person. He would wrap on his left arm like everyone else. But a left-handed person wraps tefillin on his right arm. Right? And so a person who is right-handed and loses his right arm, God forbid, so he still has his left arm, which is the arm for wrapping tefillin. He just can't do it himself because he doesn't have a right arm, but he should get help from others so that he can wrap tefillin on his left arm. He's still obligated to the extent that he can get help in order to do it. And the school of Menachot taught with regard to the verse, and you shall bind them for a sign on your arm, and they shall be for frontlets between your eyes. In Deuteronomy 6:8, on your arm, this is the bicep. Between your eyes, this is the crown of the head. And the Gemara asks, where exactly on the crown of the head are the tefillin placed? And the school of Rabbi Yannai say tefillin are placed on the place where the bone above the baby's brain is soft after the birth. Now that's the fontanelle, which I always thought was like back here, but it's not. It's closer to the front. Now, what I understand about tefillin is it's here, right? Like my hairline is quite high, but it's basically the hairline, right at the hairline. Seems to be implying that it's a little bit higher than that. So here's the halacha. The proper place for the tefillin of the head is the crown, i.e., from the beginning of one's original hairline on the forehead to the end of the place where a baby's head is soft after birth. Okay, so it's at the hairline, but that's kind of like the lower end. So the correct place is from the hairline to about, here where the fontanelle would be on a baby. Okay, next topic, weiter. The sage Pelemu raised a dilemma before Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. In the case of one who has two heads, on which one of them does he wrap tefillin? Rabbi said to him, either get up and exile yourself from here, or accept upon yourself excommunication for asking such a ridiculous question. Now, is there any ridiculous question? No, they teach that in every yeshiva and in every university, right? The only stupid question is the question you didn't ask. Any question can be a legitimate question if you're sincere when you're asking it. And it sounds like this student was sincere when he asked, well, what if a person has two heads? Which head should he put the tefillin on? Now, this sounded so ridiculous to Rebbe that he thought the guy was not being serious. He was making fun of Rebbe. He was being disrespectful and making fun of their class. But, listen to this. In the meantime, right at that moment, a certain man arrived and said to Rebbe, a firstborn child has been born to me who has two heads. How much money must I give to the priest for the redemption of the firstborn? And a certain elder came and taught him, you are obligated to give him 10 selah, not 5, because the redemption of the firstborn, where you give 5 selah, now these days it's done with $5.50. It's a very symbolic thing. You find a Kohen to give it to, but it's by the head count. And if somebody has two heads, well, then 10 of these coins would be necessary. You'd have to find, you choose which Kohen to give it to, but you'd have to give 10 coins instead of 5 if the baby has two heads. Now, I think that this was like a real, Hashem giving a kind of a loving disciplinary kiss to Rebbe, that he was, so angered that somebody would say, well, if somebody has two heads, which head should he put the tefillin on? And boom, somebody walks in and says, I just had a baby with two heads. He had a different question, but clearly it's possible for a baby to have two heads. And it does happen. You can have conjoined twins. Sometimes it happens that there have been all kinds of conjoined twins. Sometimes they share the same pair of legs but have two upper bodies. Sometimes even a part of their upper body they share and they just kind of part closer to the shoulders. Sometimes there's like a person has a regular head and then kind of like a smaller, head that didn't quite form all the way. There have been all kinds of, very unusual things that happened at birth. And so it certainly could happen that a person has two heads. So the Gemara asks, now on this thing about the 10 sela instead of 5, if a baby's born with two heads, the Gemara asks, is that so? But Rami Bar Chama teaches, since it is stated with regard to the redemption of the firstborn of man, you shall redeem, Numbers 18:15, I would derive that even if he was ravaged, for example, by an animal within 30 days of his birth, one should redeem him. You might think, to counter this, the verse states, yet the firstborn of man you shall redeem. And this additional word, yet, serves to differentiate and teach that there is a firstborn who is not redeemed, namely one that was ravaged. In other words, if a child dies, God forbid, within the first 30 days of its life, if they had already done redemption of the firstborn by giving those 5 coins to a priest, the priest gives them back. And if they haven't done it already, they don't do it. Now, a child with two heads is like one that was ravaged, as he will certainly not live. It's a kind of a treifa situation. So the Gemara answers, no, here it is different. As the merciful one makes the redemption of the firstborn dependent not on whether he will live out, the month or the year, but rather dependent on his skull. As it is stated, you shall take 5 shekels apiece by the skull in Numbers 3:47, which indicates that there is a case in which a firstborn with more than one skull must be redeemed. We're on page 37b. Now the Gemara returns to its discussion of the Baraisa. The master says, on your arm. This is the bicep, and the inner bicep specifically. And the term yad can mean either hand or arm. Therefore, the Gemara asks, from where do we derive that when you say place them on your arm, it means the bicep? How do you know that? As the sages taught, on your arm, yadcha, this is the upper part of the arm. Do you say this is the upper part of the arm? Or is it only literally on your hand? Maybe the tefillin should just be placed on the hand. Maybe on the palm of the hand, maybe on the back of the hand. And the Torah says, wrap tefillin on the yad and wrap tefillin on the head. Just as there, with regard to the head, it means the upper part of the head, as will be explained, so too, here, it means the upper part of the arm. Rabbi Eliezer says, this proof is not necessary. As the verse states, and it shall be for a sign for you upon your arm, in Exodus 13:9. And this teaches, it shall be a sign for you, but not for others. I.e., one must wrap tefillin of the arm in a place where they are not seen by others. This is the arm, which is usually covered, whereas the hand is usually visible. Rabbi Yitzchak says, this proof is not necessary. As the verse states, therefore you shall place these words in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them. Does it say in your heart or on your heart? Maybe the second time, I think it's on your heart, because there's a beautiful teaching that we place these words on our hearts, because we can't always guarantee that they're going to go in our hearts until one day the heart opens and the words kind of drop in. But okay, therefore you shall place these words in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them. And this teaches that placing the words, i.e. wrapping the tefillin, shall be opposite the heart on the bicep, right? Olive of him. Yeah, so it's really on or upon your heart, right? That's what we say. You always place these words on your heart. Can't guarantee that they will get in, but if you keep placing them on, eventually they will drop in to the heart. You'll really take it in. But the point is that they need to be opposite the heart, right? So your heart is here on the left side, and you want to put the tefillin close to the heart, not pointing out, but toward the heart. The Gemara relates, Rav Achia and Rav Acha, the son of Rav Avia, would direct the placement of his tefillin of the arm and wrap them opposite his heart. And Rav Ashi was sitting before a Maimar, and there was a cut in the sleeve covering a Maimar's arm, and as a result, his tefillin were visible, as they were not covered by the garment. So Rav Ashi said to a Maimar, doesn't the master hold that the tefillin shall be a sign for you, but not a sign for others? And a Maimar said to him, this does not mean that tefillin must be hidden. Rather, this was stated in order to teach that they must be donned in a place that is a sign for you, i.e. the bicep, which is generally not seen, but it does not matter if in practice the tefillin are visible. So for example, if you're wearing a short sleeve shirt, you wrap it on your bicep, okay, well, it's not that you don't put on tefillin because you're wearing a short sleeve shirt, you do. However, if you're wearing a long sleeve shirt, as I usually am, so when I put on tefillin, I roll up my sleeve like this, I put the tefillin on the arm, I do all the wrapping of the strap, etc., and then I lower this shirt over the tefillin, as I've been taught to do. That's not a halacha, it's not necessary to cover the tefillin on the arm, but it definitely is a custom, with a strong force of custom. That if you've got a sleeve, it's good to cover the tefillin. I'm not sure if that's with every group. It's definitely people who daven Sfard, as I've been shown in my show. Okay, so if you have a question about that, ask your local Orthodox rabbi. Okay, with regard to the statement of the Baraisa that the tefillin of the head are donned on the upper part of the head, the Gemara asks, from where do we derive this? Why not just put it on the forehead, pointing straight forward? From where do we derive that it's on top? As the sages taught, between your eyes in Exodus 13:9, this is the upper part of the head. Do you say that this is the upper part of the head? Or is it only literally between your eyes? Why not put it right here at the bridge of the nose? It is stated here, between your eyes, and it is stated there, you shall not cut yourselves nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead, in Deuteronomy 14:1. That was a custom that other religions had, to cut themselves for the dead, so the Jews were commanded not to do that. So just as there, the phrase between your eyes is referring to a place on the upper part of the head, as that is a place where one can render himself bald by removing his hair, so too the place where tefillin are wrapped is on the upper part of the head at the hairline, a place where one could render himself bald if he was trying to do that. Rabbi Yehuda says this proof is not necessary, as the Torah says, wrap tefillin on the arm and wrap tefillin on the head. So, just as there, with regard to the tefillin of the arm, it is referring to a place where it is fit to become tameh, ritually impure, with only one type of marking of tsaras, that of the skin. So too here, this is a pretty technical proof, so too here, with regard to the tefillin of the head, is referring to a place which is fit to become tameh, with only one type of mark of tsaras, that of a place of hair. That's going to be at the hairline. That's going to be as distinguished from eyebrows, which could become, you could have tsaras in your eyebrows, has a different type of tsaras that could appear there, and that excludes that as a location. Right, so Rabbi Yehuda continues, this serves to exclude the area which is literally between your eyes, as in that spot there is flesh and the hair of the eyebrows, and therefore there is a possibility of tsaras through a growth of white hair, which is impure according to the laws of tsaras of the skin, and there's also possibility of tsaras through the growth of a yellow hair, which is impure according to the laws of tsaras of the head and the beard. Next topic. The Mishnah teaches with regard to the 4 tzitzis, the ritual fringes that we wear on garments that have corners, right? Because garments in ancient times were much more akin to like a poncho that had 4 corners and a hole in the middle you stuck your head through, and then you wrapped it around yourself, etc., belted it. So garments had corners. And so now we put on a garment that has corners right under our shirt. I have a 4-cornered garment so that I can put the 4 tzitzis, the ritual fringes that we're commanded to wear, to remind us of all the commandments. That's in the 3rd paragraph of the Shema. So let's go dig a little deeper on the requirements of tzitzis. So with regard to the tzitzis on a garment, the absence of each prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the others. Right? We're back to our Mishnah number 10 here in chapter 3, as the 4 of them constitute one mitzvah. If one of your tzitzis falls off, you're not fulfilling some kind of a mitzvah with the other 3. Once you've lost one of the tzitzis, you've got no tzitzis on your body in terms of fulfilling the mitzvah. With regard to the 4 tzitzis on the garment, the absence of each prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the others, as the 4 of them constitute one mitzvah. Dissenting view. Rabbi Yishmael says the 4 of them are 4 distinct mitzvahs, and the absence of one does not prevent fulfillment of the rest. We don't hold like Rabbi Yishmael. The Gemara asks, what is the difference between the opinions of the first Tana and Rabbi Yishmael? What is the practical difference? Rav Yosef said the difference between their opinions is with regard to a linen sheet with woolen tzitzis that has fewer than 4 tzitzis, right? Remember, you can't wear wool and linen together. If you have a linen garment with 4 corners, you can put woolen tzitzis on that linen garment. That is an exception to the prohibition of shatnez, that we can't wear linen and wool together. But if you lose one of those woolen tzitzis, the other 3 aren't doing anything. They're not fulfilling the mitzvah of tzitzis. So now what you've got is a garment that has wool and linen together, and you're violating shatnez. Rabbi Yishmael would say each tzitzis is its own mitzvah. Therefore, the 3 remaining ones are fulfilling a mitzvah, and they can stay on a linen garment. The difference between their opinions with regard to a linen sheet with woolen tzitzis on it, as I just explained. Rava bar Ahina said the difference between their opinions is actually with regard to a cloak that has 5 corners. It is derived that a cloak of this kind requires tzitzis. We'll learn that on page 43. But it is unclear whether tzitzis must be placed on each of the 5 corners. If each fringe is a discrete mitzvah, then the obligation applies to the 5th corner as well. But if it is one mitzvah to have 4 tzitzis together, then you wouldn't need a 5th tzitzis on this 5-cornered garment. Ravina said the difference between their opinions is with regard to the opinion of Rav Huna. As Rav Huna says, one who goes out unwittingly to the public domain on Shabbos with a 4-cornered cloak that does not have the tzitzis on it that it should have is liable to bring a sin offering, because the remaining fringes are not an integral part of the garment, right? The 3 others are not doing anything. It's not fulfilling the mitzvah of tzitzis. Since they do not enable the wearer to fulfill the mitzvah, those 3 additional tzitzis, which are not fulfilling a mitzvah of anything, are actually considered to be a burden, which may not be carried into the public domain on Shabbos. And the first Tana agrees with this ruling, whereas Rabbi Yishmael maintains that since each corner with tzitzis is the fulfillment of a mitzvah, one is not liable to bring a sin offering due to carrying on Shabbos for wearing this kind of garment with only 3 tzitzis on it in a public domain. Rav Shesha, the son of Rav Idi, said, one who cuts the corner of his garment has not done anything of consequence with regard to exempting the garment from the obligation of tzitzis, as he has rendered it a cloak with 5 corners, to which the obligation of tzitzis still applies, right? So if you have imagined a rectangular garment, right, like a poncho, and it has 4 corners, and then you cut off one of the corners. Well, when you cut off one of the corners, what would you have done? My little eraser deal here. I mean, just simply speaking, right? If you had this was the four-cornered garment, there was a hole in the middle for your head so you can put it over your body. Okay, there's four corners. Well, if you cut off one of the corners, right? If you cut off one of the corners, so what do you now have? You basically have a five corners. One, right? You'd have 1, 2, 3, right? And then 4, 5, right? So you'd have a five-cornered garment. And as we just said, a five-cornered garment needs tzitzis, right? So a person who thinks that by cutting off one of the corners of a four-cornered garment, he now has exempted himself from putting tzitzis on it, he has not. He hasn't done anything at all. Rav Misharshia similarly says, one who ties his garment has not done anything of consequence with regard to exempting that garment from the obligation of tzitzis. What is the reason? It is considered as though the garment is untied, since you're making knots in the corners, like imagine a towel, and then you just kind of made a knot in the corner, just using the corner of the towel. Well, you haven't done anything because you could untie that knot. It is considered as though the garment is untied, since the knot can be loosened at any time. And we learn likewise in a Mishnah, Tractate Kalim, all bound leather jugs, i.e. those whose bottoms are not sewn but tied, are ritually pure, are tahor, meaning they are not susceptible to becoming tameh because they're not finished vessels. Something that's just held together, that's sought by a knot in it, rather than stitching, is not considered a finished vessel that could become tameh. This is because they're not considered receptacles, as these knots can become untied, except for the leather jugs of Arabs who would tie them with a permanent knot. And Rav Dimi of Nehardea similarly says, one who sews his garment, i.e. he folded over a long garment and sewed the edges together, he has not done anything of consequence with regard to the obligation of tzitzis. And he must place tzitzis on the original corners. And the reason is that if it is so that he does not need the folded part, which is why he is sewing it, well, then let him cut it and throw it away. Right? You can't cheat, so to speak, and not have to put on tzitzis by making these kinds of arrangements. They don't work. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Now, the Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Yishmael says the four of them are four discrete or distinct mitzvahs, right? That each of the tzitzis is its own mitzvah, and this is the minority view. We say that the obligation of tzitzis is to have four tzitzis on the four corners, and if you lost one of them, you're doing none of it. Rabbi Yishmael says that the four of them are four distinct mitzvahs, and the absence of one does not prevent fulfillment of the rest. Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says the law is in accordance with Rabbi Yishmael. And the Gemara says, but the law is not in accordance with this opinion. The Gemara relates that Ravina was walking behind Mar bar Rav Ashi on the Shabbos of the festival. So the Shabbos of the festival could either mean the Shabbos before the festival or the Shabbos during the festival. The importance here is that in Talmudic times, on the Shabbos before a festival or the Shabbos during a festival, many people would come to hear a lecture from the great rabbis of the period. So Ravina Mar bar Rav Ashi on the Shabbos of the festival, when the corner of Mar bar Rav Ashi's garment, on which his tzitzis were hanging, tore. And yet, Ravina did not say anything to him. The point is, it's Shabbos, right? So when he arrived at Mar bar Rav Ashi's house, Ravina said to him, back there along the way, the corner of your garment tore, and you lost one of your tzitzis. So Mar bar Rav Ashi said to him, if you would have told me then, when it happened, I would have thrown off the garment there. I would have had to leave it there because I couldn't wear such a garment and bring it home. As once one of the tzitzis is torn, no mitzvah is performed with the rest, and it is prohibited to walk in the public domain on Shabbos wearing such a garment. And this is in accordance with the opinion of the first Tana, who disagrees with the ruling of Rabbi Yishmael. Now the Gemara raises a difficulty. But didn't the master say, great is human dignity, as it overrides a prohibition in the Torah? And this includes the prohibition against carrying on Shabbos in the public domain. That being the case, why would he remove his garment in public if that meant that he was going to have to, walk home without a garment on his upper body. And the Gemara answers, Rav Bar Shaba interpreted that statement before Rav Kahana. Now we're at the top of 38a. He stated this with regard to the prohibition of, you shall not deviate to the left or the right of that which they tell you, in Deuteronomy 17:11. So a prohibition by rabbinic law, that is overridden by human dignity, but not a prohibition by Torah law. Therefore, Mar Bar Rav Ashi would have removed his garment had he known about the tear, because according to him, he'd be violating a Torah law by wearing such a garment on Shabbos. And there are those who say there is a different version of this discussion. It was when they were there, in the place where the corner of Mar Bar Rav Ashi's garment tore, that Ravina said to him, your garment just tore and you lost one of your tzitzis. And Mar Bar Rav Ashi said to him in response, what is your opinion? Do you think that I should throw the garment off? But doesn't the master say great is human dignity as it overrides a prohibition in the Torah? And the Gemara raised a difficulty, but Rav Bar Shaba interpreted that statement before Rav Kahana. He said this with regard to the prohibition of you shall not deviate, not the prohibition against carrying in the public domain, which applies by Torah law. And the Gemara answers that here too, it is not a prohibition by Torah law, as the place where they were walking was not a full-fledged public domain, but a carmelit, or carmelis, in which carrying is prohibited only by rabbinic law. Therefore, for the sake of human dignity, he could have kept his garment on until he got to the place where they were going in a private domain. Okay, a couple of questions. Sharon, what if one corner has an unkosher tzitzis? Is that the same as having one's corner tzitzis absent? I'm not sure what unkosher means, but if we just assume it's like it's just not properly tied, it doesn't count as tzitzis. It can't be, if it's unkosher, I assume that means you can't fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis with it. Therefore, it doesn't matter, right? It's as if it wasn't there at all. And so therefore, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of tzitzis with it. That would mean that, now, it's interesting. Like if you have an eruv, right, then you can carry something with you, and so then it would not be considered a burden. But if you don't have an eruv, right, and so so this would be like if you in a community where they don't have an eruv, which sort of joins the outdoor streets as if it's all one private domain. That's where people will wear their talis to shul, to synagogue on Shabbos, so that they're wearing a garment. But if that talis was missing one of its tzitzis, it sounds like it probably would come under this instruction that we're learning here, and he would not be able to carry, he would not be able to wear such a garment because of this law that we just discussed, and he would have to, leave it behind. I mean, he's not wearing a kosher talis in that situation, so he's carrying tzitzis around the other three that are not fulfilling the mitzvah of tzitzis, since it's not all four that would be present. And finally, Bill, you know what I noticed? We don't actually get the answer to Palemu's question. The child that was born that had two heads, when it grow up, where did he need to bind his tefillin? We know that some people with conjoined or vestigial twins do survive into adulthood, even in antiquity. I mean, I think that, I don't know the answer. I'm totally guessing now. But I think that if you got two heads where like each one is a person, right, like conjoined twins where they are different personalities, then I think they would each need tefillin. That's my guess. And, if one of their heads is kind of malformed and it's just sort of like a growth, even if it seems to have eyes and a nose, etc., but it's not, where that seat of consciousness and speech and sight is residing, then I gotta be that the tefillin would go on, on the primary head, so to speak. That would be my guess, because you're right, we didn't get that answer. That's what I've got for us tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday at the regular Tuesday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night. Oh, and Chodesh Tov. It's Rosh Chodesh Adar. When Adar comes in, our joy increases. We are entering the month of Adar, the month that contains Purim. Chodesh Tov.